Good afternoon, everyone. Ethan Fogg, Canandaigua Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us for another Tuesday at 2. Today, we're going to learn a skill that I know I should have learned probably in kindergarten, if not maybe second or third grade. We're here to talk about cash flow mapping. It may sound like a simple concept, but it's like understanding the circulatory system for business. So we have friends here from Lutz Associates. We've got Carl Lutz and Matt Collins with us today. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Good
Hi, Matt.
Hi, Matt. So Ethan, Matt, why don't you pull up the name of our presentation?
Okay.
So I'll tell a little story about this. Learn how to tell your money where to go instead of asking where it went is something I created quite a long time ago. And I found that most cash flow planning tools are really like a rear view mirror look. Like, so if you think about QuickBooks or Quicken or Mint, all of those are importing transactions into your system, and then you're categorizing and trying to figure out how you spent your money. We think we should look at it a little differently. So that's going to be our focus today. And my intention is to give you guys some tools. Even when we're done with this, Ethan's going to distribute some things that you can use yourself. We'll also give you an opportunity if you want to talk further to Matt and I, you can do that. But our goal is that you walk away with something super tangible that can make a difference in your life. As Ethan said, let's take this off, Matt. My name's Carl Lutz, and Matt joined my firm back in January of this year. He just graduated from RIT and with a degree in finance. And I've been a financial advisor for about 21 years now. And I love conversations with business owners, especially because I've been one since I'm 18, quite honestly. I started my first business at 18, and what I realized many years later, of course, hindsight's 20/20, as they say, is that, you know, I had a credible desire and passion to start a business, probably like a lot of people on this call. And that doesn't necessarily mean you truly understand the ins and outs of the finances of the business. You know, a lot of people, like I affectionately call a lot of folks who have successful businesses in rural communities, because I'm in a rural community and I've traveled and worked with people in rural communities. I affectionately call them blue collar millionaires. These are folks that have they just had a passion, whatever it might be. Farmers are a perfect example of that. They don't really focus on farming to become wealthy. They focus on farming because they love it, and they love the lifestyle, as an example. It just happens to be they build a lot of wealth on their balance sheet, not cash flow. That's always a problem with farming, it seems, but right. But anyway, so it's not unusual for a business owner who's even been in business a long time not to fully understand how to analyze their cash flow. And, you know, often we're thrown into a world of terminology that accountants might understand or attorneys might understand. But yeah, we understand enough to get by. But I'll embarrassingly admit, I truly didn't understand how we made money until the 7th year I was in business. Isn't that crazy? And,
yeah.
You know, and actually I hired a person who taught me the terminology of the industry that I was in. Like, all I knew is work hard, you know, sell more than the stuff costs, and keep your labor. I knew labor costs, and it was a food business. I knew food costs, and then I just winged the rest of it. And I actually made money from day one, never not made money. But my point here is, we could be a really good income earner. And this is true with professionals as well. You see it all the time in the medical community, or veterinarians, or, you know, you could be an excellent at your skill, an excellent at what you do, but that doesn't necessarily make it so people really genuinely understand their cash flow. Does that make sense to you, Ethan? Have you had that experience with
It does.
Anyone?
We were just having a conversation over lunch the other day, a friend of mine, that there's a huge difference between handling cash and having that cash be yours. Because when
Mm,
you get a business to a certain size, or you may have more than one line of business, so your cash register may have a lot in it, but if you have fixed expenses or indirect expenses, things like that, that are invisible to the naked eye, depending on your relative familiarity with business, because there may be some people on the call who've been in business a long time and could probably co-teach this, but there's probably going to be some other people that cash management is a very specific discipline within business. You
yeah,
can be very successful and go out of business because the cash that you're touching doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your debt service. It belongs to your utilities and operations. So that's what I'm hoping many of us will walk away with today, is how perhaps to build a model, to build an infrastructure for our cash that
yeah.
allows us to keep more of it.
Yeah, you're right. And really, it does seem, I know it seems like a generic, a fairly basic conversation, but I've been around a long time in this business, and I actually created the software for other advisors to use, and you can't believe the response we get, that there's nothing out there that helps people analyze cash flow. It's just
Yeah.
shocking. I mean, it seems so what do I want to say? Yeah, not generic, but juvenile. It seems so juvenile, like everybody should
Yeah,
know
we're
this.
supposed to know this, but you know
Right.
what? There's a lot of things we're supposed to
And,
know.
and especially if you're in business, you should know it.
Yeah,
And
right.
maybe there's folks on this call that know it well, and they're just, maybe they're not great at communicating it. Or, there's some people that are terrific at it. Naturally born that way. I swear, it's amazing.
Mhm.
But anyway, my goal is to demystify the conversation around cash flow, not just for yourself and your family, but um, for your employees too. If you have employees, last thing I'll say about my previous business and the cash register, like you said, I handled a lot of cash flow. In the restaurant business, you're lucky if you keep 10%. But
Right.
if you're bringing in $1 million a year, you're handling a lot of cash flow. And your staff thinks you're loaded. For somehow they disconnect. They think, oh wow, every check that gets written up or rings up somehow goes in my pocket. And of course, they don't. They don't know that. So anyway, let's move on. And what I'm going to do is, I started to say my goal here is to demystify the complexity around cash flow for people, honestly. And I'm gonna show you some of the tools we have that will be distributed when we're done. And I think I'll talk to the audience through a current situation I was doing with somebody that was affected deeply by COVID-19.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is really, it was interesting. I've been doing webinars titled, the disruption of cash flow is way more disturbing than your 401k going down 20%, right? So typically advisors are focusing on what's going on in the market, and hey, depending on everyone's situation, obviously time horizon, all that kind of stuff, we can always recover from that 20% decline or whatever it might be, that disruption in the market. But a disruption of cash flow is very, very different. We might not be able to recover from that. Now, some business owners are experiencing an incredible increase in cash flow due to COVID-19. It depends on the business you're in.
Right.
And that, in a sense, creates a better problem, but it still can be a problem. It's like, what do I do with this cash flow? How does it, where do I reinvest it, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. Optimize it.
Right. So I like to say happiness is a positive cash flow. And then I back that up with, we all know money doesn't buy you happiness. Like probably everybody on this call, this webinar, absent Matt, he's a young man, so he might still think money buys you happiness. But
Well, it makes it easier to be sad. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we know it doesn't buy happiness, but it's really difficult to be happy with a negative cash flow.
Right.
And that's because of the commitments and pressures that we have. It's scary. And one last thing I'll say before we pull up this chart, you know, cash flow is an interesting thing. There's two sides to the equation. And to your, again, to build upon what you were saying, Ethan, about the money coming into the register isn't really yours. Well, on a personal level, for an individual, that is, I have a client who's done very, very well. He's created a significant net worth outside of his business. And he's a young man, he's 50. And he called me one day and said, I've got an offer, a significant offer for the sale of my business. Can I retire? Now, the immature Carl, 21 years ago, because it equated to about $10 million between the two, it would have been like, of course you can retire. You got 10 million bucks. Who couldn't retire? No. My first question was, it all depends upon your burn rate. What are you spending? If you're 50 and you're spending $500,000 a year, no, 10 million won't do it. You know? So the number of zeros are a different conversation. It's really about the flow of money. And so let's take a look. Let's take a shot at showing the audience the way we look at things. And, you know, this is one of the tools that Ethan will distribute at the end, or if you haven't already. We're going to start with business, looking at business cash flow. And, you know, we've all heard the saying, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And I think this picture does speak 1,000 words. And I want you to keep in mind, although this is incredibly simple, that simple doesn't mean without effort. Simple just means without complexity. And that's really what I think is so important when it comes to understanding money. It's to remove the complexity. And part of that complexity is in the timing of things and how we label things and how we call things. So let me just take you through this. If you're a business owner, you know, we've got that. First of all, we think everything you do should be converted into a monthly number, both business and personal, because that's another thing that messes people up is the frequency of which the income comes in, especially if you're in a seasonal business. But if you divide it by 12 across the board and then get more granular after that, you'll have a decent understanding of what's happening. So we want to say, what's my monthly, on average, looking at history, what is my monthly gross profit? So I said to you, I think I'll tell a story through somebody that I've helped recently through COVID. And this number for him, he built a beautiful business, but it's in the healthcare world, he was bringing in $90,000 a month of gross profit. Now, again, I don't mean to speak down to this audience in any way, but I can tell you, I talk to financial advisors around the country, and you know, we all like to pound our chest. What'd you make last year? Or a real estate agent, what'd you make last year? And they always reference the top line revenue that they brought in. And I said, well, I used to own a restaurant. I brought in $1 million. I didn't make $1 million. So obviously gross profit is it's after the expenses of the product, but before the expenses of the operation. So this guy was bringing in $90,000 a month of gross profit. Now what really complicated things for him is there were 6 businesses. So 3 S Corps and 3 LLCs, because he owns the real estate, which is a very common strategy that business owners own the real estate in which they operate out of. So what we found as we unbundled one business at a time, we came up with that monthly number. By the way, COVID took that 90 down to 19. Ouch, right? Pretty scary. Can you imagine that, Ethan, going from 90 to 19? Like
well,
overnight?
In the 80s, I did that, but I don't want to do that again.
No, but this guy's a terrific guy that stays super optimistic, and but we still needed to get very practical about the flow of money in his world. And I'll be honest with you guys, he wanted me to help him understand cash flow before COVID-19. So here was a guy, I don't like this, I'll say it anyway, but I have another friend that says you can't out earn stupid, meaning this guy knows how to make money. He knows how to generate cash flow, but it's just not his forte to pay attention to it. I can't explain it, right? So we've got
earning it and keeping it are 2 different things.
Yeah, two very very different things. So anyway, we took the monthly number, and what we wanted to do is say, where were you before COVID-19? Like, I personally needed to have an understanding, and that's what I would recommend the audience to do. Look at your numbers before, if you were negatively or positively impacted by this situation, what was normal? Find a normal year, 2019, 2018, and build yourself a foundation to work from. So from this guy, what we did is we said, all right, it was 90,000 a month. And then we identified, what are the fixed expenses of that particular S Corp? And, unlike many business owners, I'm finding out, and I know this might sound strange to some and not others, somehow his electric bill from home is getting paid out of the fixed expenses of the S Corp. I know, right? Most of it was all, very legit stuff, and there was no malicious intent there. And as far as I can tell, his accountant was counting that as a distribution. But the point is, it doesn't belong there. It just doesn't belong there. And it doesn't put the business owner in a strong position to make good decisions. And by the way, if you ever plan on selling your business, we don't want, if Ethan's buying my business, I got to try to explain that I've been paying my home utility bill out of that business. That's not a good thing.
Yes.
So anyway, we spent time cleaning it up. We identified a fixed expense, which we categorize as predictable in amount and timing, like mortgage payments or rent or taxes or insurance. Pretty, I understand insurance goes up maybe every year, but it's fixed. In the restaurant business, that would be, again, your rent, your insurance, your utilities. On variable expenses, that would have been food costs and labor cost. So depending on the business you're in, you have fixed. In other words, if a customer showed up or not, I got to write that same amount, same check to the insurance company. Where if I don't have any customers over here under variable, well, obviously my food and labor costs, if I'm paying attention to it, are going to be reflective there. And then if you're a C corporation, of course, we have corporate level taxes, but in this case, it was an S Corp. And then whether you choose to reinvest back into the business, we'll come back to that in a minute. But at the end of the day, we've got this gross number coming in. I've got my fixed and variable expenses, and what's left over theoretically is available for distribution to its owners. I say theoretically because hopefully there's a positive number there. Now we're boiling it down to what are the distributions available, and am I going to retain some of that in the company? This is another area people get mixed up. I'm not a CPA, but I see a lot of S corporations out there where people need to understand an S Corp or an LLC is a flow through entity, meaning it doesn't pay taxes at the corporate level. And if there's a profit, even though I don't take that profit, it stays in the company as a retained earnings, but I still have to pay income tax on that profit. Now, whether I literally reinvest, I take some of that retained earnings and reinvest it back in the company so I can be more profitable in the future, or I just leave it in the company because I want to, right? Just as a little security. And then if you have business partners, there's distributions to others, and then ultimately distributions to you. Now, again, I'm a stickler with terminology because I think words matter. They really do, especially when you're trying to communicate to your family or to your staff and team members. And maybe if I'm an S Corp, I might have myself down as a W-2 employee. I'm getting some, getting paid for what I do. If I'm an S Corp or an LLC, maybe I get paid for what I do, and distributions are getting paid for what you own. And not enough business owners break those two down. And I don't mean to talk too much about my past, but I can tell you, when I owned that restaurant, I took a paycheck, and let's just say that paycheck was more than what would take me to hire someone to do that job, right? So really part of that paycheck technically was a distribution, right? Because let's just for round numbers, if I was taking 100,000 a year, but I could have paid somebody 40, I'm really technically, I should have been paying myself 40 and taking a distribution of 60, as long as the accountant's okay with that. Okay. So really getting your terminology squared away. Now, again, I'm talking about an S corp. In an LLC, it really is all distributions, shareholder or member distributions, right? But I think when you are able to hone in on that and understand who's getting paid for what and why, and this is true if you have partners too. This is I've had 3 partnerships in my life. My father was one, and a couple of others. Same thing. You want to get paid for what you do, and then get paid for what you own. So I own a company right now in which I own 58% of, but I don't operate. I don't really have a job in it. And my partner, who owns 40% and someone else owns 2, my partner, he gets paid a nice salary every month. Why? Not because he's my partner, because he's functioning as a role. And if we fired him and had to hire somebody else, that's what it would cost us to hire that person. So no owner should work for free. This is a big subject. I wasn't planning on going down this path, but this is where miscommunications happen amongst family members, especially. So anyway, terminology is really important. Matt, Ethan, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add to that, or questions or clarification?
Well, I'm taken by the fact I hear kind of 2 parallel and I think helpful conversations playing out at once. One is that as a successful business person, you want your business to look like what it is. Clean, orderly. I'm not saying, I'm not implying any misdeed, but to your point, to make a business saleable for the greatest value, like anything else, to make a house saleable for its greatest value, to make a car saleable, it needs to be well taken care of, in good order, with the correct parts in the right place and tuned.
Correct. You're 100% right.
That's one conversation. And the other side I'm hearing, when I looked at the graphic you had, when I first saw the tax subcategory, my thought was sales tax. A lot of the folks that we work with are in retail or hospitality. And I think a risk, I've seen it in the course of my life. I've seen businesses go away because they invaded their sales tax revenue to cover their operating.
100%.
Desperate times, desperate measures. And I think right now there's some pretty desperate times, meaning no offense to anybody, but that there are tools that are designed for that keep you out of court, that keep you away from aggressive and expensive collections efforts. So maybe there's space for that later in the conversation, but it still reinforces the idea that a properly managed and tuned business removes the temptation, perhaps, of doing the wrong thing, because when you look in the drawer and see all that cash, you better understand. You are more likely to have a fuller understanding that you can't just reach in and take everything that's there, because some of it belongs to the tax man and some of it belongs to the utility company. And to your point, I think even as people that we know and work with, as they develop their careers, that many of them do gain a better and more complete understanding of cash flow. But the sooner we can help them understand that, perhaps they can become better stewards of company assets, better stewards certainly of their own assets, and become more capable, and maybe even retire a year earlier on the back end because they made some of the right decisions earlier. Yeah, Matt's smiling. He's going to retire at 43. I can tell that already.
Right, right. The other one even that people get mixed up on are payroll-related taxes. That's a biggie too that can get, but those are all variable expenses really, because depending on my sales will dictate the variable. That's why that tax didn't take in sales tax or payroll-related tax. It's more under the variable side, because depending on the volume of sales and depending on labor and all that kind of stuff, it's an ongoing moving number. So
yes, and part of my professional development over time has been a really true appreciation of the value of certain subcontract relationships, like payroll processing.
Right.
Can get very complex, even if, like in a situation like ours, if we have 1 or 2 people on payroll, it still is very complex. certain earnings are different than certain others, and caps and this is and that's is. So there's a lot to be said for engaging subject matter experts to do what they do well.
100% agree.
And in many cases anyway, the savings, whether they're cash or convenience or opportunities, far outweigh the expense.
100%. Perfect. So Matt, pull up, not the family map, pull up the side by side for me, and then we'll go to the family map. So let's talk about, why are people in business, really? I mean, I've read lots of business books. And by the way, there's a great saying. It says, accountants love numbers, accountants love words, and clients love pictures. And I love pictures too. Now, I'm also love the numbers and the granular behind this, but at the end of the day, that's really your advisor, in my opinion. You know, that's their job, to work with you side by side to get those granular numbers to get onto one piece of paper so that you can easily have a conversation. Before I move on to the family map, Matt, go back over to the left. Is my mouse working if I circle here? Yeah, you guys can see that, or no?
No.
Okay, can you circle monthly gross income on the business side?
Yeah.
And actually, I'm gonna take the I got it now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you have to control my screen.
Okay, back to the COVID story, just so you know. So when we went from 90,019, we then had to go back and say, which of these fixed expenses are gonna be delayed? Like, there was a lot going on. This guy's down in the New York City area, so obviously they got hit really, really hard. So yeah, we had to figure out what the negative was. And then we took the PPP money and the emergency disaster release money, and we mapped out a whole COVID conversation so that to see how it would work for, say, the next 4 or 5 months. So the beauty is, my point is, I would recommend whoever's listening, if you're in a challenging situation with cash flow, go back and see where it was, like I said earlier, so that you have a foundation to go up against, and then go in and make all your different changes. But now let's get back to the days when cash flow is good. That business map down here, distributions to you, well, isn't that really the primary purpose of business? Isn't it to then take care of the people you love and care about, and to provide a future? I mean, I know there could be more reasons, your passion for the business, your love of whatever it is you're doing, but I can't buy groceries at Wegmans with love. I need dollars. And dollars, right? They have to come over here to the family map. Now, a couple of things. Once you get to the family map, so if there are people on the call that aren't a business owner, this will be super relevant to them. It's the same concept. Matter of fact, we started with family maps. What really messes people up, Matt, let's actually click off. Do we have a screenshot that talks about the problem? Yeah, current problem. Let's go to that real quick.
No.
I'll clear that.
Okay.
Maybe you need to.
I get it.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about the problem with managing cash flow, whether it's be an individual or a business. I think the traditional way of budgeting, which commingles fixed and variable expenses, is a problem. And we think that should be separated. The frequency of pay, let me back up. Think about your parents' generation, or I don't know how old everybody is on this call. My parents were World War II generation. They had one paycheck. There was no credit card. There was one car payment. I mean, it was really quite simple. Today, it's incredibly complicated. We're living in this paperless society in which I have direct deposit. I've got credit cards because I want my air miles. I've got debit cards that might be pulling from my account. Maybe I'm paying my bills on auto pay, or using my debit card, or writing checks, or Venmo. Like, none of these options existed 40 years ago. So now add a 2-income family with 2 different frequencies of pay. monthly, weekly, bi-weekly, over withholding on taxes, under withholding on taxes. Yikes, no wonder people are confused. That's why we call it the circle of confusion. So what we want to do is, the solution is to separate these things. So Matt, let's go to that solution piece. Again, all of this can be done on your own. We're going to provide you with a workbook and workbook instructions on how to do the personal maps. But basically, how do you get around this complexity? Convert everything to a monthly number. I personally like to work right off the tax return. I look at what was my real income. Forget about bonuses. Not forget about them, but don't worry about when the bonuses came in, or that extra paycheck because you get paid every other week and there's 4.3 weeks in a month. What you want to do is take that annual number and divide it by 12. Then really, of course, no truth can be told without context, but in an ideal world, you want to pay yourself first. We call that long-term savings down here. We're going to look at a bigger picture in a minute. Separate fixed and variable, and that is ginormous. We're going to talk about that when we look at a bigger picture of the graph. And then really what you want to do is solve for what's left over. After you figure out what's left over, then allocate, then budget what's available after you've met your fixed expenses, after you've paid yourself properly, protected your plan properly, and all of that. Then you don't really even have to budget what's available. The what's available part, to me, I look at as like an allowance. So let's go ahead and click out of this, Matt, and just pull Ethan back up. Does that make sense to you, Ethan? Do you can see how that might, why people forget about businesses, individuals can be confused about their cash flow because of all these options.
Well, and I think it also, I find little things like, it is lovely that today we live in a society where credit is so available, and on a good day with the right system to help you track, a great number of businesses in seasonal operations use lines of credit to manage their cash flow.
Sure.
Not illegitimate, not bad business. Risky.
No.
Risky if it's not done with a plan. Same thing, it's called a credit card at your house. It's really easy to just roll over $100 this month, becomes $400 next month, becomes, it's bigger than a student loan by the end of next year. And so I really respect the idea of pulling apart the fixed from the variable, because, I remember my first job still in college a million years ago, being told, oh, good heavens, I think I was on salary at $175 a week. I thought I'd arrived,
Right.
And, well, even that doesn't account for income taxes. Even the difference between what you're told you make and what you actually bring home. There's a huge delta there for most people.
Sure.
Continue that out with, what are the, when you say you want to save some money, you probably can't go to your landlord and tell them you're just going to pay them less. So I think where we're headed in this conversation is the discipline really comes in identifying where you can make choices.
Right. That's exactly right.
Because
Perfect.
In the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, we've seen the advent, and I don't mean to put myself in a bad position because we offer it to members that need it, but of subscription-based payment plans. Netflix and
Sure.
Amazon, and I mean, some people, XM radio, they're all particularly convenient. Set it and forget it is a phrase you hear a lot.
Right.
And you multiply that out and add those 2 cups of coffee you buy on the road every day, and that invisible leakage is what I tend to think of it in my budget as. That could be hundreds of dollars a month.
Right. So what we found is, if we go, we'll pull up that family map in just a minute, Matt. Just give me 1 second. If we get all the way down and solve for what's left. So let's just use an example of, a 2-income family making a decent income, and there's $4,000 left after the fixed expenses are paid, you've saved properly, you've paid your taxes. And It's really this system, I created this system, and it's really born from the envelope system from the Depression. You should read
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
That what they did in the Depression was, you know, there were no credit cards. There were no lines of credit. You came home and you literally had envelopes, rent, utilities, food, and you divided the money. It works.
How I was raised. Yep.
It actually really works. So
Mhm.
here, we're not going to, we don't live in a world that's convenient for that anymore. Going to the gas station and paying with cash, And by the way, if anybody's on this call thinking, hey, this is really for people that are struggling financially, actually, that's not right. I know people that make a lot money and are frustrated by the amount of waste they have in their life. This conversation is not about being broke. It's not. It's really just about, matter of fact, for those who have limited resources, they handle cash flow better.
Yep.
They have to.
Yeah.
It's when you're kind of fat and happy and you're frustrated not understanding it, and you've tried different systems, and that's why that rear view mirror look of, hey, where did it all go, doesn't work. So instead, you want to figure out what am I allowing myself to consume. Now, my wife and I implement this system, and let me tell you what has happened. Number one, we actually don't really ever say no to anything. It just might not happen that month.
Mhm.
There is such a thing as delayed gratification. So if you give yourself this allowance, I'll use my $4,000 number as an example. All it does, look, life's not perfect. And I can tell you right now, money is fluid. It's constantly changing. I have clients that are engineers. They have an engineering mind, or a pharmacist, and I've helped them retire. I figure out, and they want to know the numbers to the penny, right? And I finally realized, wait a minute, that's not going to happen, because between now and the next meeting, a new law just passed, for example, like tax laws change, like money is fluid. And our life situations are fluid, and we need to be able to adapt to them. So my point is, if you come up with this allowance number of, say, $4,000, and you have adult children or high school kids, darn well, they're pulling on you all the time for soccer money and theater and things you didn't plan on. So it's really as, hey, on January 1st, we have $4,000 and it has to last till January 31st. Now we might spend 1,000 of that on groceries, but my point is, in this system, in a sense, not to sound harsh, but we almost don't care. Like if you spent $1,300 on groceries because your kids came home from college, well, then you have less money to go out to dinner. Or if you spent 1,000 on groceries, you have more money. It's your 4,000. Spend it the way you want. And then if you want to track it, that's when those other systems like Mint and QuickBooks is, so you and your spouse and your partner can sit down and go, where are we spending our $4,000? And so what you'll find happens is, it's hard to even explain. All of a sudden this little game comes into play where you don't want to spend the $4,000. And it's like, you actually try to get underneath that number just because you can, Yeah. And then if something comes your way and there wasn't a plan for it and you don't want to say no and you have to come out of, and that month's 5,000, well, then next month make 3 work. And it actually works. It's not rigid. Like dieting or counting calories, right? I've been successful at that. And then as soon as I stop, I fail.
Right.
I'm sure most people can relate. So tracking every receipt and tracking all that stuff is frustrating. So Matt, let's pull up the family map real quick. I just want to, how are we doing on time, Ethan? We okay?
Oh yeah, we're just fine.
Good. So this is the family map. Again, solving for what's that true monthly net income. And I say net here because we want to maybe work off of our financial documents like a tax return, because some people get, and I know this is a more sophisticated audience, but they get a tax return. It's like, oh, the government gave me money back. No, you overgave them, or I owe them money.
And they didn't give you interest when they gave it back.
Right. So we want to know what that true number is, regardless of the frequency of pay. in an ideal world, a person, I'm working with a lot of young people, and Matt's bringing in young people, and we're teaching them, if you can get into the habit of putting 15 to 20% over here, and don't mix up the difference, Mr. Young person, with this. Like my daughter is a recent college graduate and she's saving like crazy, but it's really a save to buy a house. Like that house, it's in a way, I mean, you could pick one of the two. Unless an asset's going to produce income to you, it's a liability. Think about that.
Interesting. Yeah.
Now, I know, again, I told you I was brought up by parents from the World War II generation, right? Before World War II, a very small percent of the population owned their own home. So the Great Generation is what took real estate out the roof in value. But if I own a house on Canandaigua Lake and I don't Airbnb it, and I even paid cash for it, yes, it could appreciate and probably would appreciate in value, but I don't realize that value until I sell it, if I ever sell it.
Oh, and it's got a burn rate.
And it's got a burn
Yeah.
rate. In the meantime, it requires cash flow. It doesn't provide cash flow.
Something that I've been taken with, you've been very thoughtful to separate the personal model from the business model. And in my mind's eye, they're pretty much the same because, and I'm hoping not to take us off track here, but for the benefit of the folks in the audience, because I'm guessing that some folks in the audience are looking at this as a consumer. Some folks are looking at it as business people, and some may be dual track, really looking at it about, okay, I came to work today because I'm not ready to retire. But at work, I'm responsible for managing facilities and for brand management and for payroll. And even looking at this model that's on the screen right now, long-term savings is probably, forecasted equipment sunset. We have a widget that every 100,000 times it does what it does, we have to do a $50,000 rebuild on it.
Right.
That I don't know if you would truly consider that save to spend or long-term savings, but I think the temptation, and I'm not going to point to anybody right now because I don't think anybody's managing their business right now in a way that's capricious or arbitrary or self-serving. But I think in good days, the risk can become that, look at all the money we're handling, times are good. We don't set aside for that equipment rebuild. We don't set aside for the tax reassessment that we know is just going to eventually happen. So we can take very gainful, very successful businesses and destabilize them without really intending to.
Right.
By just not building a structure that protects its integrity over time.
Right. So Matt, go back to business maps for a minute and I'll verify what you just said. I got to clear this. So here, that's what you're talking about. Reinvestment.
Yep.
Depreciation on a tax return is a paper calculation. Yeah, but if you own a business that can take depreciating assets and depreciate them, you know what? They really are depreciating. To your point.
Yeah, they let you do that because they're not going to be worth much when it's over.
And it's like that's real. So that's why we talked about. You're right. So on the business map, retained earnings is preparing so that we're not doing all distributions to others and to you.
Right.
So we wouldn't call it save to spend on the business map. We would call it retained earnings, which is sort of a save to reinvest.
It's almost like the years that I haven't had a car payment, I try to make one anyway, to me, because I know I'm going to need a car. By the time you've paid it off, that means you need a car.
Correct. But in this case, that reinvestment will hopefully turn into more profit. Like that's a real asset, even though it's a liability, it contributes to the golden goose that lays the eggs, right?
Gotcha.
So 100% agreed. They're identical, just the words are a little different.
Fair enough.
So, but identical thinking. Matt, pull up the side-by-side for me, please. So yeah, as far as these maps go, we'll finish here and then we'll pull up a few other things. But you're right. There are people on this call that are just are consumers. They work for someone, and there's others that own businesses, right? But everyone that owns a business is a consumer. Not
Fair
everyone
enough.
that's a consumer owns a business,
Right.
but there is no, I mean, they go hand in hand. That's
Yeah.
what makes family individual businesses so fascinating.
Well, this is a
And
universal language. That's part of what I'm seeing here.
correct.
What I like about it is if I or anyone really masters it, you're not having to learn two languages.
That's right. You can apply the same exact philosophy
Right.
to both sides. And for those of you that are on the call who has a partner or a spouse that gives you a hard time because they don't understand the cash flow, this is a great way to explain it. My wife doesn't give me a hard time, but she wants to understand. And I'm able to quickly demonstrate when I tell her I'm going to do this. And she's like, well, where's that coming from? And I said, well,
Right.
it's coming from here, not here. Don't worry about that. As long as continues, I
Yeah.
get to do what I want over here, you know?
And to those who don't understand, just put them on an allowance.
Yeah, right. So, all right. I think we've made our point with the maps. Although I did miss one point. Once you solve for, you've done your savings, you've done your fixed expenses, by the way, I would recommend instead of an envelope, you have one checking account dedicated, same could be over here. You know that number. It's 10,000 a month, 9,000, 8,000. You and your family say, okay, 8,000, if that was our number, goes into this checking account every month. Not every bill in this account is paid monthly. Doesn't matter.
Right.
We're going to put 12 months. We're going to figure out all the bills and divide them by 12 and deposit 8,000 a month. So I have a client who said, Carl, this is unbelievable. You know, I have a buildup in my fixed account, and he started adopting our language. And, you know, it was Christmas time, and I'm telling my wife we need to be careful with spending for Christmas. And this is a gentleman that makes a couple $100,000 a year, to my point earlier. And she's like, look at all that money in the fixed account. And he said, that's just because the bill hasn't hit yet. That's all. It's not
Timing.
available.
Yes.
It's not available. See how
Timing
easy it is?
matters.
Just take it off. Anyway, you solve for this number, and then you and your family get to decide how you want to spend it. Do you want to save to spend? That's that big ticket stuff, the vacation, a remodeling job, whatever. So if this is 4,000, I'll call it 4, and I'm putting 1,000 over here. I really only have, I'm down to $3,000 that I have to make a decision about every 30 days. And some of it might be a little bit predictable, like, hey, on average, we spend this on groceries, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm really down to this number. And that's, we've taken this big number up top and gotten it down to this little number that all you have to do is make decisions about. And the same is true over here. Works identical. So let me clear this.
Like Ethan earlier talking about sales tax. Just
Right.
putting that sales tax number every single time away in a separate account. That
That's
way you
correct.
don't touch it.
That's right. You can't commingle it.
Yeah, make it hard to get to things you don't belong getting to.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So let's just tell these folks what we're going to be sending them afterwards. Matt, pull up the workshop instruction book for us. So we created this. You can scroll through it a little bit. We're not going to spend line by line, but it really everything we talked about today that I verbalized, what the problem is, what we think the solution is, and literally how to build a map for yourself. All the instructions are right here, which we'll be distributing. And then if you go to the worksheets, Matt, the instructions help with the worksheet. So now when I work with a client, Matt and I work with a client, we do this all through our technology, but the technology we use is not an available resource for the end user. Advisors use the tool to help their clients. So we created these paper tools for clients to use. So anyway, it's a great way to get started. If you never talked to another advisor again and you just wanted to figure this out at home, we can walk you right through it on your own. And if you go to the very last page here, Matt, I think it's the last page. Yep, right there, it's page 7, excuse me. Yeah, first we solve for what's left over for variable spending, and then we go on to talk about the variable categories, and then you get that same visual. We give you prompting ideas, and then ultimately you end up with that same map we've been looking at. Okay, so that's going to be available for distribution. Did you have any question, Heath?
I was going to say, part of what I'm enjoying about this, it flashes me back to probably my late 30s, early 40s when I had a little bit more stamina. That I realized there was a time in my life that my tastes were outpacing my revenue. Well, and businesses have the same thing. Burn
Sure.
rate's a little too close to revenue. Well, do I need to extend to a 6th business day a week? Do I need to, because for people that know me, they're going to understand that I just find a way to have more instead of a way to fit down into what I've got. Because no disrespect to your model, I think there's a step almost maybe beyond it. That when you get to that number that says this is my unallocated bottom line,
Yes.
then the question is it enough?
100%.
And the answer, the 25-year-old me would say, well, then I'm just going to pillage my long-term savings account. Whereas my adult says, you know what? In the Finger Lakes, especially in the summer, there's a lot of part-time job opportunities. Or as a retailer, maybe there's one night a week I could stay open late because the restaurants around me are open late and get just, if I could pull in another $200 a month, it would move that needle just far enough at home or at work or wherever. So part of what I'm enjoying about this is I think it's a handy way for people to determine, frankly, if their business model is sustainable, whether it's at home or at work. But if you solve for that and the answer is 0 or it's negative, well, really, because there are people kind of like me, student loan, mortgage, car payment, my fixed expenses are kind of high. So I have to make decisions outside of that about what I'm going to do. I'm a landlord. There's other revenue streams in my life because there have to be, because I want that number where I want that number. And
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you were looking at the business and the personal map. So on the family side, you get down to that unallocated number. There's one of 3 outcomes. That makes perfect sense to me. That's exactly what I thought it was. Great. Or, oh my God, no wonder I'm incredibly stressed out. I have no money.
Yeah.
Or, that's way too much money to have left over to just be blowing. I want to save more. Those are the 3 outcomes.
Yep.
If it's the, oh my God, I don't have enough money, what are my options? 1, I can go back to fixed expenses and try to create an efficiency, maybe through refinancing. This is what I'm doing with that business owner down in the New York City area. I mean, he carries a lot of debt for those businesses.
Yeah.
So, I can go back to fixed expenses, see if I can create an efficiency, or to your point, I can increase income.
Right.
That's an option.
Sublease. Yeah. If you're a business or a landlord, you can figure out a way to, reconfigure some of your assets, make them work harder for you.
Correct. And on the business side, right, you can say, okay, I sell this widget for $10. I sell 10 of them a month. It costs me, these are my factors to get to my gross profit. There's only a handful. So either I can increase the number of widgets I sell, I can decrease the cost to produce the widget, or I can do both, which is even better. But it's this awareness. The awareness is so important. We can't change that in which we're not aware of. So even though a lot of what we said today might be super obvious to people, but aren't the simplest things, like once stated, are obvious, right?
Yeah.
And that always just cracks me up because people think they offend me when they go, Carl, this seems so simple. That's actually a great compliment. Simple is about, again, removing the complexity, not removing the effort. And then putting
and not
yourself.
everything simple is easy. A bird
No.
can fly, and they don't have anywhere near as much brain power as I do, and I can't fly.
Right. That's exactly right.
And by the way, some of us can do and some of us can't.
I want to encourage your audience to move past, before we started recording and talking, we talked about money's one of those subjects that you really don't talk about,
Right.
We didn't talk about the other ones you don't talk about, but money's definitely one of those. And that's too bad. Like you've been super on, open, Ethan. I've been pretty open. It's like, I have nothing. Money is just a tool. Money is a tool. And it's a tool that must be used and handled wisely. And it's why I love our business is because my true mission with Lutz Associates is to help people resolve their conflicts and contradictions around money. And those conflicts and contradictions are sometimes in our minds, whether they're because of our experiences or lack of knowledge or misunderstanding of something or bad advice that I got, or they're technical. Like, I did this with this person and this with this person, and these two things don't jive. So a conflict and contradiction can keep a plan from working really, really well. And it could be in the area of estate planning, business exit planning, retirement income planning. Today, we focused on cash flow. Today, our focus was how do we remove those conflicts and contradictions around cash flow? And I think the answer is you take it and move it into awareness. Once it's in awareness, then we can start changing. Just think about if you're driving down the road and your tail light's out and you don't know it, and the police officer pulls you over. Now I know my tail light's out.
Yes.
And I think if you get a ticket, you have a chance to go get it fixed and you don't have to pay that ticket, because how would you know your tail light's out, right? Same with money. You can't change that in which you're unaware of. So awareness is so true, so key. So Matt, last slide, I think, pull up the, can I give us a shameless plug on the different services that we offer?
You gave us an hour of your time. It's only fair.
Okay, good. Let's pull that up. So what we do for folks, we focused on number one today, cash flow analysis and management. But if you look at the circle, really, there's a lot going on in people's lives financially, and we can meet them wherever they want to be met. If cash flow isn't their thing, maybe that comes back, that's number three. But you said earlier, Ethan, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. So a wealth protection review is so important. Yes. What happens, I think of a wealth protection review as the airbags in your car. Like you don't want to find out the stuff you have doesn't work at the time of impact. You need to know that ahead of time.
Yeah, dollars are units of opportunity. So I want to keep some and I want to exchange opportunities with others, but I don't want to be the one that has none left.
Right. So we want to make sure you get to your goal too. Like what could get in the way from lawsuits, and what other ways can cash flow be disrupted, and how do we avoid that?
Right.
So anyway, cash flow analysis, wealth protection, investment analysis and management we do. Retirement income planning is one of my favorite things to do. That's really, in a sense, like exit planning. Exit planning is, hey, I've got the value of this business. Exit planning is, I've got this business, I need to convert it into capital, which then provides me income to be able to retire. Retirement income planning is somebody that never owned a business, but they have these investments. Same thing. They need to figure out, how do I turn that into cash flow in order to retire? It all comes back to cash flow.
Gotcha. Funny. Yeah.
Yeah. Estate planning is another big area that we help folks on. Business succession, if you have adult children in your business. Exit planning, if you have key management team, or if you're going to sell to a third party. That's an area we focus on, in charitable planning as well. So we can help people with one area or pull all the areas together. We certainly pride ourselves in not giving advice out of context. That's our key. So the last one, number 9 there, just tells you a little bit about me. It's a one-pager. I like one-pagers. It tells you a little about the cash flow conversation that we had, the services that we offer, and at the very bottom, you can leave that up for a few minutes, Matt. That is, if anyone ever wanted to have a conversation, it's simply a discovery call. It's a discovery conversation. Don't be afraid. It doesn't cost you a nickel to have a conversation.
Fair enough. And all of this contact information will be included in the materials we're emailing all of the participants on the call today. And just reaching out here. I don't see any questions from the audience. I'd like to thank you both, Carl and Matt, for your time today. This has been very informative, and I'm already thinking differently about that impulse buy I was going to make on my way home tonight.
All right, good deal.
Thank
So,
you for having us, Ethan.
yes, thank you again. And to all of those on the call, thank you for taking an hour out to think critically about the way you manage cash at home and at work. And be well, everyone, and we'll talk again soon.
Great. Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Certainly.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.